Twilight sank through the kingswood like a thrown net. The trunks of the oaks were black ropes slicked with sap. The leaves above sewed together in a rucked canopy that swallowed the last of the sun. The air was sweet with crushed mint and rot, the breath of mushrooms and damp soil, of horse sweat and stale wine. A boar lay in a bed of ferns with a spear and 2 shafts jutting from its side and slivers of white bone showing at the broken tusk. Its eyes were small dark gems, blind now but still accusing. Men were shouting. One of them was the king. Robert Baratheon sat hunched on a fallen log with his great hands braced on his knees. Blood had soaked through the slashed leather of his doublet, sticky down his side and tacky over the old lattice of scars. "I told you," he wheezed, and the strength in the words made them almost a laugh. "I told you the beast would learn my dance before I learned his. No more talking, your grace." A voice urged, and a hand, the soft, scented hand of Grand Maester Pycelle, pressed at the wet bandage with a careful fussing that invited a blow. "Let the poultice take hold. It will draw out the corruption. We must return to the city with all haste. Your squire will ride ahead." "My squire," Robert said, and his gaze found Lancel Lannister, white-faced and stricken on the edge of the circle of torchlight. The boy's fair hair seemed soaked with daylight even now. He smelled of fear and wine. It had been Lancel who pressed the skin into Robert's hand over and over all day. Lancel who had smiled too quickly and trembled too much. Robert looked and did not know yet whether he would say the thing he was thinking. The boar's hide gleamed with grease and blood. His great head was cruel. Robert understood that head. It had been coming for him for years. There were nights when he had woken with the thing crouched on his chest, its blunt tusks grinding, and he had told himself it was only age. Age wearing a pretty face. Wine, women, courtiers, soft beds, sweetmeats. It had not come on a battlefield because Robert no longer went to battle. It had come in the woods with its stink in his nostrils and his warhammer in his hands and the taste of his own blood in his mouth. He had knocked it to the earth and the earth had bucked up to meet him. "I can ride," he said. "I am no babe to be swaddled." Barristan Selmy stood near as a white tower, watching with that steady blue gaze the realm had leaned on 100 times. Robert pushed himself to standing. Pain flared like a struck hearth. He grunted and set his jaw. "Warhorse," he said. "Find my horse." They brought him the bay and he swung up and there was a little groan he could not swallow, which he fed to his teeth. He wanted the hammer, but someone had seen to that. It was already wrapped and slung. Lancel edged closer with the reins, and the king's eyes slid past him as if the boy were fog. They started for the Red Keep in a ragged string. The torches flickered and bent like fish under a current. The darkness inside Robert was thicker than the darkness around him. He rode with his teeth clenched and sweat prickling down his chest, cataloging pain as he once had cataloged wounds, and what the pain did not distract from entirely was an old northern voice, rough and spare, that had brought him a piece of iron truth. "They're not yours, Robert." That had come from Eddard Stark a fortnight past in a room that smelled of vellum and dust. Eddard had held up a book of lineages, and Robert had wanted to laugh and had not laughed. He had said, "Show me something that bleeds." Then the hunt had been announced. The wine had been too rich, too sweet. He had drunk anyway, and the sweet had turned sour and the sour had turned to blood, and the boar had done what a boar would do, and Robert had done what Robert must. And there was a boy with hair like summer wheat who had pressed the skin to his hand at every halt and had not met his eyes. The city rose from the dark like a black reef. Lanterns pricked the walls of the Red Keep. The gates opened for him, and the clatter of hooves on stone made a bright noise in a place that smelled of damp mortar, sea salt and the piss of a million small folk. His heart, invisible and bruised, frowned against his ribs. "Bed the king," Barristan said. "Pycelle, send for more linens. We will have no clumsy hands near him." The old man bobbed and muttered, and the white cloaks pressed back the curious like snow-banked fences. Robert slid out of the saddle with Selmy's arms under him, and he hated that he needed the support. The world went gray at the edges and took a measured step away. When it stepped back, he was on a mattress in chamber light and Pycelle was bending to take a look at the wound while 2 boys ran for clean water. Robert let them cut the doublet away. He lay and stared at the rafters. The ceiling was heavy with age and smoke stains like the fiddly shadows of leaves. "Where is the hand?" he said. "Lord Stark is at his own chambers," Barristan answered. "I have sent a page." "Send a man, not a page." He drew a breath that tasted of the tallow smoke and Pycelle's peppery unguents. "And send for my squire," he said, and those words were ice. A little while later, the room filled with the aura of the North. Eddard Stark entered with his gray eyes and that hard mouth of his whose kindness had to fight its way through iron to show. "Your Grace," he said, and that northern voice went across the room and turned a key in Robert's chest. The king felt something in him put its one good shoulder to a door. "Close the door," Robert said, and Barristan himself went to set the bar. The room tightened. The oil in the lamps hissed. Robert motioned, and Pycelle, with a scandalized moo, took his basket of herbs and left them. With him went a hum of attendants. Only Barristan remained, and Lancel, who had entered at a nod, white as old milk and trembling at the wrists, and Eddard Stark. Robert gazed at Lancel a long time. "Boy," he said at last. "Your Grace." Lancel swallowed. He could not look anywhere. His eyes skittered like fish. "This is my friend, Lord Eddard Stark," Robert said. "You will tell him what you told me." He had not been told yet, not in words. But there are confessions that sit already in the air, and a man has only to stoop and take them. Lancel swayed. My lord, what did you put in the king's wine?" Eddard asked. "No heat in it." Stark had no need of heat. His voice was a weight. "Nothing," the boy whispered, staring not at Ned but at Barristan as if in any white figure there might be mercy. Robert's hand shot out and caught Lancel by the throat. He hauled him in as he rose on one elbow, barking a pain that made his skull ring. "You did something." He was very gentle and very terrible. "You fed me sweetness until my tongue went numb. You smiled, and when I bled you stumbled." "Who told you to sweeten the wine, Lancel?" "No one," the boy choked. His eyes darted to one place and then another, as if there might be a door that opened onto a fresh life. "No one, Your Grace." "Shall I fetch the jailer?" Barristan asked softly. Eddard stood with arms at his side, as he had stood many times in other rooms where truth stank worse than a privy. "Cersei," Lancel squeaked, and his face crumpled as if at the touch of that name he were a wall that had been held up by desire. "The Queen said it was for your comfort. She said you liked it strong. She said you were a man of great thirst, and it would please you and make you merry, and what was merry for you was merry for the realm. She did not mean harm. She would never, Robert said, and the word ate something on its way out. His fingers opened and the boy slid back, gasping. Barristan's hand steadied the king's shoulder as he fell onto the pillows. "How long?" Robert asked, staring at the canopy with its faded griffins. "Has my lady wife been having my wine sweetened? I don't know, Your Grace. I did as she commanded." "Of course you did." Robert's eyes closed. When he spoke again, there was frost on the syllables. "Get out. Not far. Not far enough to run. Do you hear me? Stay within the keep. If I wish to see your weeping face again, I will not be kept waiting." Lancel stumbled to the door and had to wrestle the heavy bar himself, and was relieved of the last awkwardness by Barristan, who opened and then sealed it again. Silence filled the room as if it had been waiting. "Eddard," Robert said after a little while, and there was the weight of too many years in the way he said the name. "You told me they're not mine." "I told you what I believe," Ned Stark said. "What you know," Robert snapped. He opened his eyes and found the man at last. "You showed me a book and told me about hair. I called for blood. I have it. I have a Lannister boy's hands on my cup. I have my wife's scent all over this." He made a small gesture toward the bandage. "Was this their pretty way of keeping their golden stag on my head a little longer? Or is there a fool's play in it I can't see through?" "The Queen is capable of having you killed," Ned said. "She is also capable of believing herself too clever to be caught. She has grown used to winning at shadows. When men like that move in daylight, they trip." "It was no killing," Barristan murmured. Not yet. Forgive me, your grace. What the boy admits to would have dulled your senses and slowed your hand. It would not have killed you, not unless the beast did the rest. I have seen 100 hunts go wrong on less. I am not asking if their hands held the spear, Robert growled. I am asking if the spear had a Lannister ribbon on it. He sighed through his teeth. It's all one. Stark, tell me again. Tell me like you would tell a headsman ordering a stroke. Ned Stark did not preface or soften. Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella are the offspring of the Queen and her brother Jaime Lannister. I had confirmation beyond the book. Jon Arryn had the truth before they killed him. His last words were, "A trail for me to follow." I found the king's bastards in the city. All had your color or a version of it. The children in the royal nursery do not. All of them have the look of Lannister. Robert's breath came rough. For a long time he stared at the lamplight, which swam a little as if he looked through deep water. He had had this rage before. He remembered being 19 and punching his fist through the boards of a gate in the rain because Lyanna's voice was in his ear and Rhaegar's name was a stone in his mouth. Only then there had been a war he could go to. Then there had been a man in silver mail he could break with his hammer until the world made sense again. There was no hammer for this. "I'll have her," he said softly. "I'll have her before me, and we will see what songs she sings when the walls are close." He turned his head. "Barristan, my king, take 2 white cloaks and Janos Slint and 100 gold cloaks. Wake the queen quietly. Bring her to me. If there is a whisper of steel in a corridor I have not ordered, I will know whose boots made it and I will shod him in red-hot iron." "As you will, your grace," Selmy said. He bowed, crisp as the first cut into a roast. Then he was gone. Pycelle was brought back and moved through the beam of the king's stair like a man moving through hail. He babbled the old assurances and smeared the leech muck, and Robert let him talk, because he heard nothing but his own blood and a song of iron under it. Eddard did not speak. When the maester had finally gone, Robert turned his head again. "I have been a fool, Ned." "Yes," Ned said simply. Robert snorted a laugh that hurt. "You might coat that with honey, Northman. I have no honey left for this. Nor would it stick. What do men call you when they have no need to wheedle?" He did not wait. "They call you honest. I am not always sure I wanted honesty from you. It's a hard, cold thing, but it's the thing I need tonight." He pushed himself a little higher on the pillows, his face pallid with the strain. "When she comes, you stand beside me. Not behind. Beside." They did not wait long. Barristan returned with 2 other white cloaks like winter standing behind him, and Janos Slint with his heavy jaw and the black cloak fit tight over the belly. And with them came Cersei Lannister, wrapped in a gown the color of dark wine, with her hair a waterfall of gold in her hands because her maid had been too slow to braid it. She had not been bound. She would not have allowed it. There was a light to her that was not lamplight, a sheen, a readiness. She saw the king in his bed, and then Ned at his side and Barristan behind and the other faces in the corners, and she smiled as if moving a piece on a board. "My lord husband," she purred. Her gaze slipped to the bandage, to the blood that welled like a memory. "They said the beast took a bite. How brave of you to bring it down anyway. All the city will cheer." "Close the door," Robert said. He did not raise his voice. The door closed. The bar settled like a hand on a throat. "My lady," Eddard said, and the ice in his tone was not a thing he chose. "Lord Stark," Cersei said, and her eyes moved like a cat's from him to Barristan to the king. She had always been beautiful. It had been a clean cruelty to her beauty when Robert was younger. He could look at her and know where he stood. Now it was odd, a mask that had grown too heavy for the face under it. "You sent my boy to sweeten my wine," Robert said. She lifted her brows. "Did I?" "Lancel has admitted it," Ned said. "He does what he is told," Cersei said mildly. "That is a fault only when the orders are unwise. I thought you liked your wine sweet, my king. I thought you liked your wine abundant. I have slept beside you. I have watched you drink. You will not call me my king as if you remembered how to mean it," Robert said. You do as you like, my lady. That freedom ends now. He swallowed. Then he did something difficult. He softened. I have been a poor husband to you. I will not pretend otherwise. But I am your husband nonetheless, and you will answer me as a wife answers. Whose seed quickened in you when you bore Joffrey? She stood very straight, and there was a quick, bright beat of triumph in her before she spoke, and Robert saw it, and perhaps she knew that he saw it because she let the beat show. Not yours, she said. It was never yours. Barristan's head inclined, just enough to be the bow he would give before a great strike. Janos Slint made a hiss as if he'd put his tongue on a knife. Eddard did not move. Say it plain, Robert murmured, and his voice was so soft it frightened a man. Do you require lewdness, then? Cersei said, and a color rose in her cheek that was not shame. I lay with the one I chose. I lay with Jaime. He is my other half. He is the man I would have chosen if I were not to be bartered like a horse. I gave him children to spite you and to bless myself. Those are not your cubs. Robert's hand went to the sheet and clenched it. For a moment an old thing rose in him with the simple clarity of a hunting horn. Kill her. It was almost sweet, that clarity. It was almost like being 19 again and seeing the world with the corners taken off. He would have swung the hammer and there would have been a bright burst and it would have been done. He had done worse. He had done better. He had done what he had to. He was the king. He could order it. Barristan would weep after, perhaps, but he would do it. The room smelled of oil and stove-hot metal and an old woman's rosewater and his own blood. And the only thing that stopped him was the picture the soft clarity brought with it. A little fat boy laughing as he fed pigeons crumbs. A girl as bright and brittle as glass, with her mother's hair and no one's fault. Even the arrogant one with his proud jaw who had never once looked at Robert as if he were more than an obstacle. They were none of them his. He had known that in his bones since Eddard had brought him the book and shown him that, in his line, black begot black. It did not matter. He could not unlive the years of calling himself father when it suited him and forgetting it when it pained him. Barristan, he said hoarsely, have the Lady Cersei taken to Maegor's holdfast. She will be kept in airy rooms with plain furniture and a soldier's food. She will not be harmed. You will set guards who have never bent a knee to Lannister gold. If such men still grow in my city. She will not see her brother. She will not see her father's letters. She will not speak with the gold cloaks. Her maidens may bring slippers and needlework. They may not bring knives. Cersei blinked, as if she had not expected this. Robert, she said, lighting the name with all the old tricks. The king nearly said his cruelest yes I am, but he spared them both. I am, and I will finish it. Eddard, you will put your hand to paper. Summon the High Septon to judge an accusation of incest against the queen. Summon my lords to witness a mother's ambition. Send for Stannis from Dragonstone. I will have his virtues and his follies to hand. Send for Renly. Send for the Tyrells and their perfumed roses. Send for everyone who ever supped at my table and called me king. And send to Tywin Lannister that if he crosses the Blackwater with more than his drawers, I will hang him with them from the battlements. You cannot, Cersei began. I can, Robert said. And I will. He bared his teeth. You played at shadows. Now we will do it in the open, you and I. Everything you are, she said softly, and at last the anger that lived in her bones showed its teeth, is a ruin I crawled through. I did not put the pig in your path. I did not put the whore's breath in your lungs. I did not make you weak. And yet you aim to finish what the pig began. Tell yourself the lies why. Oh, you can live with. I will hear yours in the holdfast. Barristan. Selmy stepped forward. For a heartbeat Cersei's gaze met his. There was something like a calculation there, a measuring. She had dealt with women all her life. She knew how to work a man. Barristan was not a man who wanted anything she could give. That was his armor, and because it was so simple, she despised it. Your Grace, Barristan murmured to Robert. Every precaution will be taken. When she had been led away and Janos had followed to set men, he trusted at the doors to the White Bridge, and Eddard had left to write what must be written. Robert lay back in a grayness that had no center. He stared at the rafters until they were tree branches again, and the boar's eye was a nail driven into them. He could not sleep. The night swung back and forth like a lantern. Somewhere in it he heard Lancel sobbing through two thick doors, and somewhere in it he heard pyres crackling in flea bottom, and somewhere in it he heard the sea, scratching at the rock like a patient cat. Near dawn he rose and, with Barristan's arm, went to the window. The Blackwater lay beyond the red roofs and the white band of the Street of Sisters, flat and gray under a smearing sky. "You will have to speak to the boy," Barristan said after a time. "Which boy?" Robert asked. He knew, but he wanted someone else to choose a particular sorrow out of the basket and hand it to him. "Joffrey," Barristan said. "Ah," Robert said, and his mouth tasted of iron. "Joffrey, there was a boy once, a prince with black hair and a smile that had not learned cruelty, who had died before he was born because the girl who might have given him to the world had bled on the straw in a tower. The gods had made a habit of replacing things badly. Joffrey made them wait. He came into the king's chamber with a rash of heat along the line of his jaw in red patchwork and his chin thrust at the ceiling as if he were trying to balance a book there. 2 Kingsguard at his back, Meryn Trant and Boros Blunt. He did not so much look at Robert as allow his eyes to be drifted over him like a perfunctory blessing. "You summoned me, father?" he said, and took the title as if tasting whether it was still good. "Sit," Robert said. He did not offer the boy a chair. He watched Joffrey wrestle with whether to take one anyway and choose to stand. "You have put my mother somewhere," Joffrey said. "You will release her now, or I shall." Robert's laugh was a rough cough. "You will release your mother," he said. "Will you? With your what, boy? Your soft hands? Your soldiers? This city is mine." "This city is ours," Joffrey said sharply. "It is the Lannisters who feed it and keep its walls. My grandfather." "Your grandfather kept his head down when his king needed him until the winds changed," Robert said. "Do not speak to me of your grandfather. I don't want his smell in this room." He watched the flush on the boy's face move. "I have sent for the High Septon. He will sit in judgment on matters that are not fit for a father's ears. Between now and then you will remain at court. You will go nowhere without 2 white cloaks, and you will keep your mouth shut unless an older and better man asks you to open it. Do you understand me?" "I understand that you mean to shame our house," Joffrey said. "I understand that you are all too eager to believe any slander a northern traitor whispers in your ear. I understand that you were not there when Mother needed you." His voice broke on the last, and he flushed darker with fury and humiliation. Robert rose, and the effort made him go white. He stood anyway. He walked to the boy with the 10 steps it took to cross the chamber, and when he reached him he lifted a hand. It hung in the air a moment. He remembered a different day and Sansa Stark's small trembling shoulders and his own palm on Joffrey's cheek because the boy had been cruel and Robert had been ashamed afterward in the way a man is ashamed of going to a house he swore he'd never enter again. He dropped the hand. His voice, when it came, was almost gentle and it frightened Joffrey more than a blow would have done. "Stand where you can see me, lad. You don't have to call me father again. Not today. But you will look at the man as he tells you this. You will hear it from me." Joffrey lifted his chin farther, as if the angle gave him courage. "What?" he demanded. "Your mother has been taken into custody to answer for treason," Robert said. "I accuse her of laying with Jaime Lannister and bearing children by him. I accuse her of poisoning Jon Arryn. I accuse her of sending a catspaw with a blade to slay a boy in his bed in Winterfell. I accuse her of this sweetness in my wine. Hear me. If any king in any tale you were told as a child had done less to a queen accused of half of this, the tale would be poorly made." "He's lying," Joffrey said. His eyes were wet. He had his mother's beauty, the brittle version of it that cracked under pressure. "He hates her. He hates our house. He hates." "I don't need your list of what I hate," Robert said. "But hear this, you are not my son." There was a stillness then, as if even the lamps had drawn back from the heat of it. Robert felt something in his gut fold and twist. "I will not make the men drag you into the yard and say it under the sky in front of the swineherds and the wash sellers. The High Septon will sit on the judgment. The realm will have the show it requires. But you will not go to your mother's rooms. You will not speak to your uncles. You will not call yourself Baratheon. Do that in the street, and some man will spit in your face, and I will not have to come out of this bed to save you. You cannot, Joffrey began, and then the word failed under the weight of the truth that had been laid on him. And he looked for a place to put his eyes and found only men and the walls that had known the truth before he did. He made a sound that was meant to be a laugh and came out too sharp. "You are mad," he hissed. And he turned too quickly and slapped the door as if it had insulted him before the Kingsguard could move to hold it for him. And the sound his palm made was a child's sound. Sandor Clegane was outside. He had been waiting because Robert had told Baratheon to put a hound at his boy's heel. When Joffrey came out, his arm went up to strike what would not be struck, and Sandor's hand was there to catch it. He met the boy's eyes with his ruined face. "Careful, pup," he said softly. "You bleed like any man." Joffrey jerked his arm free and stalked away with Meryn and Boros clanking behind him. Sandor watched him with a look that was not yet contempt and not yet pity and not an answer to either. The Red Keep that day was an anthill with boiling kicked into it. Pages ran with sealed letters. The white bridge to Maegor's Holdfast clanged under the feet of 3 shifts of guards. The High Septon was fetched from his soft bed in the Great September and came puffing in a litter, full of admonitions and a discreet thrill that beaded his upper lip and made him look like a baker at the oven. Pycelle set his own scribes to copy, and then to copy the copies. For when the realm demanded proof, they would have it in triplicate with grand flourishes and seals that weighed like oranges. Varys drifted like a scent in and out of rooms and left them smelling of cinnamon and secrets. Peter Baelish moved through the same rooms with amused eyebrows and the air of a man counting backward from a number he himself had invented. The city watched itself with hooked fish eyes and changed nothing. The river sulked under the wind. It began to rain in the afternoon and did not stop. Ned Stark went to see Cersei in the Holdfast with 2 white cloaks at his shoulders. The queen sat at a table by a tall arrow slit that let in a pale light. The room was spare in a way that made every line of her appear lavish. She did not rise when he came in. She looked over her shoulder. "Lord Stark," she said, "the king sends his dog to bite at my ankles?" "I wasn't sent," Ned said. The maids had been dismissed. There was a spill of green silk on the chair. Cersei leaned her elbow on it as if to stain it with her scent. He thought of the room in the Tower of the Hand where he had told her he knew about Jaime and had offered her a chance to run. He had been a fool. He had imagined honorable outcomes in dishonorable games. He had imagined that a woman who loved her children would choose to live for them. He had told himself regret never came too late to be useful. It had. "So," Cersei said, "the Northman who does not bend. Do you want me to beg, Stark? I will beg if it gets me what I want. I am shameless. Remember that when you come to me with any proposal that requires my modesty." "I have no proposal," Ned said. "Only a thing I need to say. When the High Septon asks you whether you lay with your brother, lie. Not for your sake. For my children? Spare me the northern pity." "For them," Ned said. "And for your house. There are 100 ways this can come down. The one where you keep your head is not the worst one. Do not choose the worst because you mean to cut the realm to hurt one man." She smiled, small and raw. "I mean to cut the realm because it laughed at me, because I was put on a shelf like a dish by men who had never killed anything but casks, because I have worn a crown heavier than any sword, because you and my good husband think honesty is an iron and what is not iron is not worth a smith. I will not lie for your sense of decency, Stark. I will lie for my advantage. Sometimes the two coincide. Not today. Then you will hang on the faith's rope. If he hangs me, he hangs House Lannister," she said. "He will not. Robert is a brute, but he is no fool. He will remember that gold buys grain, that grain buys quiet, that quiet buys sleep. He will keep me to keep that. He has always loved sleep." Ned thought of Lancel's shaking jaw and Robert's eyes when the boy had named her. He thought of the boar with its head in the ferns. He thought, "Our fates have men inside them, and those men are smaller than the clothes they wear." "You misjudge him," he said. He is tired of being a brute. You think tired men change? She lifted her chin. Tired men reach for the closest indulgence. For him, it is justice this week. Next week it will be wine and a whore and a memory. I know him. He knows you, Ned said. They heard the bells of the great September then. A slow rolling that made the air itself seem to hump. Rain poured down the narrow slit and the panes set in it wobbled like jelly. Cersei looked at the water as if it had wronged her, and then she showed Ned all of her teeth, and he saw nothing behind them but pride. The High Septon sat in his triple-crowned foolishness and gabbled prayer, while his eyes darted to the lords like a sparrow's. The throne in the hall was empty. Robert would not sit it while wounded. He had asked for a chair, and it had been brought and set below and to the right of the old giant. And he had laughed to see the look in some men's eyes when they realized he had put himself there to make a point you could not miss. The white cloth on his side was new. Pycelle had insisted on changing it in a flurry that made Baratheon want to slap his hands away from the king's needle pricks. The great lords who were in the city by bad fortune or poor timing made a shell of attendants. Redwynes and Valerions and the haughty Hightower cousin who happened to be in port. The Blackfish Tully who had come earlier to see old friends and now set his jaw and stared at nothing. Bronze Yohn Royce, his runes dull with the rain. The fat Manderly envoy, the pale Tyrell Sprigg Ser Loras, with a face carved for bitter poems and eyes that did not leave Renly's face for long. Renly stood in fine green, bright as a summer leaf. Varys came gliding and Peter smiling and Janos spreading like a archay ink stain. There were more men Robert knew and men he had forgotten, and down in the aisles there were captains of the city watch, and beyond them a rustle of courtiers and lickspittles. The words traveled through them in little gusts, and where they hit Lannister men Robert watched the tightness come into the mouth, the glance slide to the door as if to calculate a sprint. Cersei stood in the place for the accused with a gold net in her hair and a plain gown that made the gold a shiny insult. She kept her hands folded, as if she had been told when she was little that hands behaved when clasped and had believed it ever since. The charges were read. The High Septon's voice quavered and then found a deepness, as some benedictions will. He spoke of sins so old their dust had turned to stone and of righteous kings. He invoked dead men. He called the air witness. When he had finished, he turned his eyes on the queen with a hunger he was too well fed to own. "How plead you?" he asked. "Innocent of treason," Cersei said. "Innocent of murder. Guilty only of being a wife." The hall murmured, loved her for a breath as a playhouse might love a villainess who made them feel naughty for a moment. As for the rest, and here she smiled as a cat shows a paw above a mousehole. The question is fit for small minds in small rooms. Think back through all your lineages, your holiness. See whether my bed custom has altered the price of grain or the weight of the watchman's club. If I am guilty of a sin, I have already confessed it. Spite. My husband blots out the sun. I have sought my warmth elsewhere. I will not blush for it. The hall swallowed. Somewhere in the back, a man laughed once and turned it into a cough that made a woman beside him pat his shoulder. Eddard stood with the feel of the north in his bones and did not move. Robert sat and thought not of the boar and not of Lyanna but of Cersei at 15, coming to the rock in a linen shift with the sea wind on it and her father's hand on her shoulder, as proud as if she had not yet learned pride hurts. "The faith," the High Septon said, "is charged with keeping men and women to their vows." He glanced, quick as a rat, at Robert. "The king's justice must be done. Yet the faith also has always been solicitous of children. We cannot." He wrung his hands. "No man of the cloth can relish the thought that the daughters and sons of such union." Robert spared him the rest. "I will speak," he said. There was a rustle of cloth that might have been men shifting but might have been the whole hall drawing breath. He stood. "I am Robert Baratheon. I am your king. I have been a poor one. I have this day had cause to wish I were a better. That is the shame I own and no other. Now hear me." Men's eyes came to him because they always had. It was a habit like any other, learned so young the body did it before the mind knew. "You have heard what the queen said," he continued. "You have seen the boy I called my son. You know everything now, or everything that matters to this act. That the children born of our marriage are not my blood. The law has words for such things. I will not put those words in my mouth. The faith will do its part. The queen and her brother have confessed to one point. The rest sits on scales. I am no lawyer. I do not wish to be. I have this to say, the queen will be set aside. I will not send her to the headsman. I will not send her to the wall. I will not give Tywin Lannister grounds to paint himself into a righteous corner and march on my city because he must avenge his daughter's blood. She will be sent home to Casterly Rock under guard and kept there with a household I choose. If she steps east of Golden Tooth, she will be returned in chains. As for the children, they are innocent of choosing where they came from. They have none of my blood and all of my regard. They are to be declared not of my issue and not in the line of my succession. The faith will find a term for them that does not crack in delicate ears. They will be fostered in great houses that are not Lannister. Myrcella will go to Highgarden to learn what songs smell like bread. Tommen will go to Storm's End to learn how to hold a shield. He let the name sit a moment. Joffrey will remain at court under my eye and the eyes of men who do not fear him. He will learn a sword and the law both. He will learn to hold his temper with his teeth. Those of you who wished for his head on a spike are disappointed. The realm is not a courting gift for your resentments. It would have gone badly if someone had chosen to make it go badly then. There was a twitch in the air that was opportunity. A time when men stand and draw a line that turns all the future into a string of heads. But the rain thickened on the tiles and the damp came up through the stone and settled ermine and velvet alike, and men were too human. They thought of their joints and their soup and their letters, and remained where they were. Then Renly clapped once, softly, and the sound cracked the tension. Others joined, too many of them courtiers and too few warriors, but it was enough. The High Septon blinked. He licked his lips. So shall it be, he managed after a little time. With the blessing of the Seven. It was not, of course, so simple. Tywin Lannister's letter arrived 2 days later. A sheet that smelled of dust and cold rooms and had the weight of old iron in the ink. He addressed Robert as Your Grace, and Eddard as My Lord Hand, and he wrote of his grief and his astonishment with such careful absence of heat that the page felt colder where the words lay. He did not recognize the accusations as anything but malignant slander. He reminded the king that men did ridiculous things when inflamed with jealousy or grief, and he named Jaime Lannister, a son who has served in the Kingsguard honorably for half his life. He had heard there was to be a hearing. He would attend when his duties in the West. Aloud, he desired assurances of his daughter's safety. He trusted to the king's sense of propriety and the ancient blah blah. You could hear the bones grind. Propriety, Robert said when the letter had been read twice. He sat, more comfortable now on his feet but with the wound still barking when he moved wrong. I am half-minded to wipe my arse with that propriety. Do not, Your Grace, Peter Baelish murmured. It would stain your seal. You would know, Robert said, and there was a murmur around the table that might have been relief at a jest or might have been the noise of 7 men thinking this weasel would land on his feet if the whole keep collapsed around him. The letter does what such letters must, Varys said smoothly. It admits nothing. It promises nothing. It offends no one to whom its writer may ever have need to bow. It shows the hand of a man who likes to deal at a table he built himself. Then we will not play at his table, Robert said. Let him come to mine. Summon the West, and I'll wager you a cask of Arbor gold he doesn't come alone. He will come with a host and a prayer on his lips. Then we must have our host in the Riverlands, Your Grace, Eddard said. We cannot wait on ceremony. The mountain burns Tully lands. Jaime Lannister has struck at our men in the street. We must go out to meet them. You'll have it, Robert said. He put both hands to the table, as if he meant to lift it. I'll have the Stormlands at my back and Stannis out of Dragonstone. I'll have Renly and his boy Flower, and they can polish each other while real men do the killing. That is unkind, Renly said softly, and Loras, 2 seats down, did not let his face move. I have had a poor season for kindness, Robert said without looking. Ned, you are the hand. Fix the levees. Janos, put the watch on the walls at night. I want gates closed and keys in pockets I can trust. Varys, Tell your little birds I have bread for them if they bring me a song about a rock in the west. And you, Pycelle, get your leeches ready for Tywin if he comes with the gout." Pycelle wheezed a flustered laugh as if it had been the sweetest compliment. Littlefinger smiled at nothing and made a note. Varys bowed with his hand over his heart and a gaze that said, "You think I cannot sing about a single rock? I can sing to you about every pebble in his path." In the days that followed, the keep discovered itself full of strangers. Stormlords arrived with banners damp from the road and the smell of wet leather in their clothes. Caron with his peacocks and swans, Dondarrion with his lightning bolts and the look of a man who delights in stormlight. Selmy sent for his cousin of the Weeping Tower to bring a dozen more swords that shone like decent bread. Stannis's ships came up the Blackwater like a brace of knives, black sails wet and jaws set. Stannis himself trod the stones of the keep with a face that could have been carved from ironwood. With him walked a lank man with a smuggler's shoulders and a plainness that was his own kind of boldness. Davos, he called himself and kept his eyes down when he spoke to the king, and Robert liked him at once because he could not abide a man who raised his chin before finding out if he had earned the right. "You waited too long," Stannis said by way of greeting, which was as much love as he had given Robert since they were boys. "If you had cut off the rotten limb when Jon Arryn said cut, we might not have had to saw to the bone." "You sound like a surgeon," Robert said. "I've had my fill of those men lately." "And you sound like a man who still thinks jesting cleans a wound," Stannis shot back. "It doesn't. Laughter is a hat put on rot." He stood at the window in the solar and watched the rain try to push the sea back into the river. "You will have to name your heir." "You," Robert said. He wanted to see if Stannis's mouth could open farther in surprise than in censuring. "It is law," Stannis said. "Not flattery. Renly will take this badly. Renly can take it however he likes. He can always learn to like it better later if it suits me. Your like and dislike are a poor guide to this. Words written in iron are better. A bastard boy has your strength in his jaw. He will draw flies and fools. Better to name plainly. Put my name through the city. When men must choose, the ones who value order will choose the man who built ship hulls when he was young rather than the one who polished mirrors." "7 hells, brother," Robert said. "Could you at least pretend this pleases you?" "It does not," Stannis said. "I do not think I would be a happy king. Happiness is not the point." He turned. The man who stood beside him was all blunt truth. No grace in him, but plenty of solidity. "If you wish for a happier king, look elsewhere. It is not a crime to prefer singing. But if you wish for a kingdom that does not break like pastry under a knife, write my name." "And what of your Red Witch?" Robert asked because he knew how to be unkind when he felt cornered. He had heard the whispers of fires on Dragonstone and the woman who stood before them in crimson silk and spoke words with smoke on them. Stannis's mouth thinned to a scar. "She serves a god who has no patience for liars. That is all. She will not sit at your table if I ask her not to. And she would not offer milk to a cat unless she were sure it would make the cat more useful." "I have cats enough," Robert muttered. "Very well. I will speak it." He did. The next morning he stood in the yard under a sky that was empty and loud and said the name with no ceremony. Men listened and nodded, and a red storm went through some hearts and a green summer through others. But the stone took the words as stone does and did not break. Joffrey heard and broke 2 chairs in his solar, and then tried to order Sandor to take him to the queen. Sandor scratched his scar and said, "Ask your father." Joffrey spat and Sandor said, "Spit on me, and I will teach you a language your mother never let you hear." No spittle came then. Sansa Stark heard and went to the Godswood, which in King's Landing was a puddle of green surrounded by walls, and she sat with her face in her hands and wished for her songs to be stupid again. Arya was not at hand. Arya had friends in the kitchens and the stables and on the roofs of the small barracks where boys slept, and she had a wooden sword she carried under her cloak, and she knew which 2 shutters to step through to land safely on a pile of straw, and where the kennel master fed the dogs and would let a little she-wolf throw the bone for them until midnight if she did not break too many lanterns. Ned Stark stood watching his girls from different windows and felt the ache that every father of daughters knows. The ache that is 2 aches. That they will be hurt. That they will grow and leave. Littlefinger moved like a man playing a tune no one else heard. He called on Sansa with a present he had no right to know she would like. He spoke to Ned about the City Watch and how costly food had grown and how many debts would never be paid. He found Renly in a corridor and told him something that made Renly's mouth go thin and petulant. He sat with Varys late one night, and the two of them watched the candle flame and said nothing for a long time. On a morning as wet as any in that stretch of wet mornings, a chest arrived from Casterly Rock full of gold cups and plates, and a letter heavy with words that tasted of money. With it came a message more dangerous than coin. Jaime Lannister had taken a prize on the Green Fork. He had broken a northern vanguard and scattered them like game birds. There were dead men with names Robert knew only from sums. There were messages from lords in the Riverlands crying for the king. There were trampled fields and a girl carried from her hearth by a man in iron, and a mill burned that had stood since Hoster Tully first learned to be a man. There was a sense, in all the words that came like rain through the keep, that the realm had broken into rooms and the doors between were sticking shut. Robert looked across the map table in the Tower of the Hand and drew his finger along the blue paint that was supposed to be the trident. "We will go out," he said. "We will take everything that can bear a spear, and we will meet Tywin on his own ground and break him until he learns to call the men who wear my stag master again. I am done with paper." "You are not healed," Pycelle bleated. "I am not dead," Robert said. "Barristan, you'll ride at my side. Stannis, you'll take the fleet up the Mander and make him look over his shoulder. Renly." He lifted his eyes to his pretty brother and could not resist the jab. "You'll look like a king and make the South soft around us." Ned stared at the river longer than was polite. He did not say the thing he wanted to say. He said instead, "Winterfell will send men, not myself. Someone must hold the city while you are gone, and it must be a friend's hand." "Friend," Robert said heavily. "I have had many men call themselves that. And you, get your furs. We go in 3 days." When his horse took the road again, the world smelled the way he liked it. Damp grass and leather, rain and mud, and the breath of the men riding near. He wore his armor with the grace of old love. He took up the hammer and it greeted him like a loyal dog. The king rode not with bright feathers but with meat and steel. Men who had grown fat in the city saw him and found their blood remembered how to warm itself. The road ran north and curved west, and the lands that had always made banners for war sprang to life. Every house with a sword sent it. The rain thinned. Somewhere in front of them, men in lions red moved like an irritated weather. They met first men of lesser blood and shook them like trees to drop the shining fruit of their armor. They crossed a stream swollen like a woman at term and took a little hamlet that offered them barley and a story. They came to a burned farm and set the fields alight again to deny grain to the enemy. Then they came to the place the scouts had named, and Robert felt the old itch in his spear arm and forgot for a moment the place where skin puckered on his side in a rosary of aches. The Green Fork was not green. It ran a dim gray under a sky that never got around to choosing a color. The land rose and fell in waves a horse might surf on. The grass was long and bent under the wind with a sound like brush on drumheads. Tywin's men were there in their neat tents as if a lady had set them. His banners rolled and cracked like tongues. Tyrion Lannister had not yet come to the camp with his mountain brigands. That was Lord Tywin's luck and the realms. Jaime was not there either. He had gone south to chase a rumor and would find no glory waiting on that road. It would be Tywin, then. It would be the old lion standing with his jaw clenched and his ledger-writing eyes on the coming king. They did not meet in parley. Robert had had his fill of walls of words. The drums beat as his men took shape, and it was a fine shape, one that looked like a blow thrown by a man who knew how to throw it. The vanguard took the left bank. The foot set their spears and bent and shook like a field in wind. The archers knocked and waited for a hand to move. The king was in the center with Barristan at his side and the hammer floating heavy in his hand like a promise. Stannis was not there. He was where he had to be, making ships into arguments. Renly had stayed behind because the South needed its smile. Ned Stark's men were not yet there, but there was something of him, a stringency, in the way the lines held as if carved. The first clash took a bite like a workman's bread. Tywin's front came in, and it was neat and disciplined and not easily broken. Robert did not care how it had been put together. He cared how it felt coming at him. An arrow skated off his Aldron. Another found the leather in the gap and glanced because fate, which had his name on a plate most days, had left her glasses at home. He felt the old heat come up under his tongue. He did not bellow. He always had bellowed. It had always been honest and fine. He did not bellow now. He pushed the hammer into the air as if he were slowly moving a mountain, and when it came down he chose to break the jaw he aimed at, and when it broke the jaw, it broke the man behind it. A horse screamed. Mud flew. Barristan's sword shaped circles that cut men's futures from them. Men shouted things that had meaning only in that yard. Here, now, to the right. No, wait, go. The left gave a step and then leaned, and Robert leaned the other way and steadied it with a thought that traveled through the bodies of men he would never know the names of and made them hold. The Lannister center came like a cart pushed by strong arms, and for a while there was nothing but the wet nose of it. Then it went too far forward and the sides of the cart found no friends at their elbows, and Robert saw it and he laughed because some truths never stop tasting good. He lifted the hammer again and broke a man and then another, and the cart broke, and the old lion himself was suddenly a man in a reign of men, and the reign was not going where he had intended it to go. In the midst of it, a great black stallion shouldered men aside like field grass, and the mountain on it was no mountain from a tale but a man called Clegane, the bigger one, who had Malik's eyes and the look of a beast who had never learned to be afraid because his heart had been taught to eat that meat before he noticed its shape. There was a place in Robert's bones that knew this meeting. He felt it like seeing a familiar bend in a river. The hammer rose to it. Gregor's sword was a piece of iron as long as a complacent summer. Men wanted songs that said kings slew monsters because kings were right and monsters were wrong. Robert did not care what the song wanted. He had killed a man in armor with his hammer and watched the rubies scatter and the world change. He could do it again. He could do it until the rubies ran out. Steel came fast. The horse under Clegane's mass was a mountain goat. It found purchase where there was none and made its own where it had to. The first sweep of the giant's sword took a white cloak from his saddle and made him fall without his head. Robert saw the arc of his blood and remembered the boar's tusk. He stepped in, sure under the weight, and put the flat of the hammer up to catch the next swing. It hit with a sound that clanged up his arm and put knives in his shoulder. He thought of the wine in his blood, the boy's hands, the queen's mouth, and he found somewhere not yet burnt to lay his strength. Baratheon was there to harry the giant's horse, cutting at the knee with a surgeon's pretty malice. The beast screamed and went down on one leg, and that gave Robert a thing to lean on. He brought the hammer down where shoulder meets neck because sometimes your hands remember what your mind is too busy for, and there was a sick old man sound of bone under old leather. Gregor roared. He swung without art and Robert ducked and felt the whisper of death bend his hair. He straightened and hit again, uppercutting with the hammerhead into the place under the samite that was meat and artery, and a thing in Gregor's chest gave. The big man's eyes rolled once, and the horse stumbled again and then came down, and 40 stone of man and 20-odd of gear hit the mud with a sound like a tree dying. Robert stood shaking, staring at the dead not dead face as it moved without wanting to, as if some other thing had been living in Gregor and had not yet heard it was time to be gone. He wanted to look up then and see Tywin's eyes, and there they were, across the noise and the spears. For a moment the two men measured each other across the river and the crowd and the rain. Tywin's mouth did not move. His men pulled back in a way that had been planned for a fortnight and rehearsed for a week. Not a flight, an exercise. The lion took his loss as a note in a book, value to be recovered later with interest. Robert let the momentum carry him forward to take what could be taken. He took little. Tywin would not give him more. He left behind stacked bodies and a song in some throats that would grow finer in the telling. He carried pain and mud and more men who wanted to drink with him than he could stomach. He gathered up the hammer and he gathered up the pieces of himself the rain did not want. Back in the keep, the halls smelled like wet wool and gossip. Cersei had begun to toy with the men who kept her, carrying herself as if she had chosen the holdfast as a place of retreat. She had taken to dressing in white, and she had braided the gold net into a crown. Sansa Stark's eyes found her in a corridor once and did not know whether to kneel or run. Cersei laughed at the look, and Sansa did not sleep that night. She dreamed of a singer whose hands bled because he kept playing after the strings had cut him. Joffrey had tried to go to her and been turned back by 2 white cloaks in Sandor, and he had spent 2 days in a sulk and a third in breaking a boy's wooden horse because the boy had looked at him with pity. On the 4th day, he went to the yard to watch the men drill, and there he stood in damp boots while a tall man with a tongue like a strap at a foal's flanks barked at the soldiers until even Joffrey felt his own meat strengthen under his skin. The boy wanted to look back to see if anyone watched him. Sandor watched him and did not smile. Baratheon came by and did not look at him at all. Robert came back from the river with wind and grave truth and dried blood in the grooves of the hammer. He rode under the gate of the gods, and the folk wanted to cheer. Some did. More remembered how hungry they were and how rings of onions had cost a copper more this week. Because of some lord's letter somewhere they could not eat. The king rode on. The wound in his side had reopened. He did not feel it until he stepped from the saddle and the world bent rather than his knee. They set him in a chair and he would not go to bed. He would not go to bed because he remembered the bed with sweat and blood and a boy's sobs behind a door, and he had lived 3 weeks too long in that bed. He sat in the solar and took a cup, and set it down untouched when his nose told him it was sweetened. He took another and tasted the harsh of it and drank. He sent for Ned and for Stannis and for Renly. He sent for Janos and for Barristan and for Varys and Peter. He almost sent for Cersei and did not. He had sent for her enough times in his life. "We bloodied him," he told them when they were arranged like pieces on the table. "We picked one of his teeth out of his jaw and showed it to him. He smiled with no tooth in that place and went away. That's the man. As long as coin rattles in his cup, he will drink any shame." "Then we empty the cup," Stannis said. "We control the ports. We control the gold mines. You control the sea," Robert said. He rubbed his beard and found a bit of mud lodged in it and flicked it toward the fire. "Pycelle, you will write to Casterly Rock. Tell them their lady comes home under white cloaks. Tell them she will be given to a household I trust. If they object, they can send me a letter with different words." Pycelle pecked at his wax tablet. He was an old hen who made cooing noises even when he had forgotten what he had meant to say. "Peter," Robert said, and that sly sharp face turned a little as if light had moved under it. "We will need coin. We will need to pay men to keep them from being paid by men who pay better. You will lend the crown what you say you can raise." "What I can raise," Littlefinger corrected. He never conceded an inch in words that might later be used to hang him. "There are men in the city who think the king has spent too freely on hunts and feasts." "They are correct," Robert said. "They can add my pride to the tally. But if they wish to live in a city that does not burn, they will need to put a finger in this leak." Varys smiled with the corners of his mouth. "I can spread the thought that paying now will mean eating later." "That is your art," Robert said. "Sing me a song about a man with yellow hair and no honor in him, and make men hum it without knowing they hum it. Then sing me another about a king with a hammer. Make that one quieter. I tire of hanging a banner out of everything I do." In the days that followed, the queen left the Red Keep. She went out in a litter with plain curtains, not the seafoam silk she favored. The little bells on the corners had been removed so no one could count her steps and say, "There she goes, the sound of shame." Barristan rode at one side and Mandon Moore at the other, and 8 white cloaks went before and behind. On the bridge to the west, the rain was a ribbon around them. Cersei held her head straight. She kept her hands folded as if in prayer. The folk looked and looked away because there is a kind of beauty you cannot look at without feeling your own ugliness, and men do not like that feeling. Joffrey watched from a window, and his mouth made a hard small line. Sansa watched and cried and hated herself for crying. Arya watched from a roof, her knees tucked to her chest and dirt on her palms, and thought, "The queen is leaving and I do not know whether to be glad." Ned watched and felt things inside him he did not care to name. At Casterly Rock the sea made that long old sound it always had, and a father read a letter in a place where everything was always in order. He made his mouth a line then too. He rose and placed the letter with a neatness that put men in fear. "Send word to the west," he said. We will have harvests and host both. Take the measure of the king's levies. Set men to sharpening in silence. He thought of a daughter he had married as if he had traded a horse. Well, that had always been the use of daughters. He thought, I will not hang because some fat man with a hammer takes a fancy to his conscience. He thought, there is always another ledger to balance, even if the entries are heads. The first attempt at revenge was crude. A boy with a rusty blade jostled the king as he went down a corridor without his white cloaks, because Robert had elbowed them aside to go and piss like a man. Sandor Clegane's hand caught the boy's wrist as if the gods had put a hook there and hung him from it. The blade fell with a clink that sounded like the name of the man who had bought it. The boy wept. His teeth were broken like little gravestones. He said it was for his mother, who had died when the king's men came through, and when they got the truth out of him with enough tenderness to shake something loose, what came loose was a name in the kitchens, and then a name on a bill for candles, and then a sly look on a thin face at the mouths of the street of silk. Varys knew all the names already. He let them be discovered because men like to discover things. It makes them kinder to what they already believe. Your enemies are not clever, Varys told Robert later. They believe you are a man who either drinks or kills and cannot do both. They do not prepare for a sober king. They will learn. They may yet find an art that suits you less. They needn't worry, Robert said. I'll drink again, but I will kill first. So it went for a time. The city lived in a weather of whispers, and the country lived in weather that ruined half the flax. Letters went back and forth. Ships went up and down. Stannis made a barricade on the Mander that held for a fortnight and then was burned with a very pretty trick that made him nod once. Well done. Renly made alliances in rooms that smelled of orange peels, and men began to remember he was as beautiful as bad decisions. Ned Stark sat in the Tow, R of the hand, and made lists. He sent one to his steward in the north that said, in a hand steadier than his heart, ensure sufficient harvest kept in the cellars. Buy salt while it is cheap. Do not let the river freeze without sending word. He nodded to himself as he wrote and looked out at a city where the trees were not true and the stones were. He saw his girls learning to be bits of metal in a fire, tempering. He thought, I can make use of this if I am so minded, and he surprised himself by being so minded. Joffrey learned to ride without begging the saddle for mercy, because Sandor made him, and because there is no better cure for a boy's pride than a horse that would rather go in the other direction. Myrcella wrote letters on small pages and put little flowers on them and sent them to Sansa, who kept them like prayers and then burned one and cried afterward because she did not know why she had done it. Tommen discovered that Storm's End had more dogs than he had ever seen in one place, and you could not love them all at once, but you could try. Cersei, in her new rooms at the Rock, learned that stone could be a prison or a mirror depending on the hour. She tried to make the servants touch her when they handed her things because she needed to feel something besides stone and fear. She found herself waiting at night for the sound of her father's step. When he did not come, she hated him, and the hate warmed her. Without Jaime, her mind went trotting like a restless palfrey. She found she did not miss Joffrey's tantrums. She missed his raw need. She missed being needed. She wrote a letter to him and tore it, then wrote another and sealed it, and waited for a raven whose wings beat like an old lover's hand on her back. At the end of that season, with the king's wound a scar like a comma, Tywin came east at last. He did not ride for the city because madness is a sickness not even the prideful will deliberately try to catch. He sat at Harrenhal, in halls that smelled of old fire and newer men. He sent envoys with faces he had chosen because Robert would enjoy slapping them. He chose not to send himself because he liked to see whether men would mistake guards for treasure. He made of the dead man's castle a counting room. Robert went to see him, against the advice of every man who had ever seen a trap. He rode with Barristan and 1,000 men who could not be persuaded not to follow him. It was a parley that would have been a parley if either of the two men had been inclined to let the other live in his virtue. Robert rode through the long black mouth of the fist. Harrenhal was the color of old bones. The wind went through it as if the stones had been built to make music for it. Tywin stood in the half-ruin of one of the smaller halls because he liked to be the largest thing in any room. "Your Grace," he said. "Lord Tywin, Robert answered. I should have paid you a visit years ago when you hid your head in your rock while I kept your king safe. I was counting my men, Tywin said. It appeared I would need them more later. You miscounted, Robert said. They walked toward each other because neither could bear to stand still. They stopped like two rams at a certain distance because a certain distance was dignity. You have my daughter, Tywin said. It is not usual for fathers to thank kidnappers. I have your daughter, Robert said, because your daughter was fucking your son. Tywin's face did not even know the word in his mouth. We are not in the company of small folk, he said. Nor do I repeat that softly, Robert said. Nor do I shrink from the taste. It tastes like what it is. Words are wind, Tywin said. You have some of them. I have more. You are too easy to read, your grace. I wonder that you have not been used up and thrown away. The funny thing, old lion, Robert said, is that men like you always wonder why I am not dead yet. He smiled, and it was not pleasant. It is because I am too heavy to be carried to the grave by your small hands. They talked until the sun made long blades of light, and then the light went away. They said nothing that mattered. They said everything that mattered. They did not have a language in common except numbers. There was one place where the numbers matched. The head of a woman neither of them loved enough to keep her life for. If I send Cersei back, Robert said, under your seal and mine, to dwell at the rock, never to set foot east of it, never to send a letter out that is not read by my hand, never to whisper a word that is not approved by a matron I appoint. If I do that, will you keep your swords out of the riverlands and your son off the king's road? Tywin studied him with the cold kindness he reserved for figures. If you do that, he said, I will consider a truce. I will look to my west. I will protect my revenues and my mines. I will count my lambs and keep the wolves off them. I will perhaps even advise you from time to time if asked. If asked, Robert said. I do not tend to ask. I know, Tywin said. That is why you have returned to war. It is the only room in which you know yourself, and the only room where you have to share it, Robert said, and his smile fixed and thinned. Do we have our truce, or must I set the red keep at your door and see whether your men like how stone tastes? It is no kindness to your people to starve them of my good, Tywin said. I will send you grain if my ships are untroubled. I will keep my brigands in my pits. I will give you no more lions in guards' whites. Keep the ones you have, Robert said. I want to see how well they dance when no one is playing their tune. He took a breath and felt the scar pull. And the children. I will do as I said. Tommen to the Stormlands, Myrcella to Highgarden. Joffrey, to the only place you can teach him, Tywin finished, and for the first and last time in their conversation, respect moved like shadow across his face. Keep him where he cannot help hearing what you say. So the parley ended. It ended as such things do, not with a clasp of hands but with the withdrawal of them. It ended, as all the best lies do, with some truth in it. Years later, men would tell the tale as if that day had been the only day that mattered. They would say Robert killed a mountain and made a lion choose his room. They would say Cersei went home and was a ghost behind stone while the realm changed under other feet. They would say Joffrey learned a kind of dour obedience and never learned any love. They would say Tommen grew laughing and soft and married a girl with a generous heart and found ways to be happy that did not require anyone else's pain. They would say Myrcella learned flowers by their Latin and their smell and became so clever that men were afraid to flatter her in case she repaid them with a question. They would say Stannis kept the laws as if they were a list of names of people he had promised to keep alive. They would say Renly made the South dance until it did not mind dancing when the fiddles broke because it liked the memory enough. They would say Ned Stark returned to the north with his girls and a new scar in his heart that looked like a crown, and that he governed so plainly the years after that people forgot to write songs about him and were grateful to find their flour cheaper. They would say too many things about Varys and Littlefinger because men like them always get too many words. They would say that Tywin grew old counting and died one day in a place that smelled of soap with a look on his face that said he had been interrupted in the middle of an unpleasant sum. They would say that Cersei became a legend among women who did not know what it was to have to live with legends. They would say Baratheon died with a sword in his hand one morning that smelled of figs and blood. They would say that Sandor Clegane took a wound no one could find and walked away to cut wood where no one asked him to be gentler than he was. They would say 100 things. None of them mattered in the moment Robert stood on the high walkway of the Red Keep after the truce and the rain, when the clouds had finally torn open and the light had come down like a ragged blessing. He looked at the city as if it were a beast he had hunted. He put his hands on the stone, which was warm from the sun at last. Eddard came and stood not at his shoulder but beside him, because that was where Robert had asked him to stand that night. "She tried to burn me," Robert said without looking at him, "early on, before you came with your book. She tried to burn me in a way that would have looked like my own hand had done it. She did not succeed. I do not know whether I am glad of that or sorry, thinking of what lives like this will cost." "It will cost everything," Ned said. It was not a threat or a doom. It was a statement of weather. He had no more honey to spread over anything. He had learned that sweet is not what keeps men alive in winter. Robert nodded. He had grown heavier again. He would grow heavier and lighter and heavier. He would yo-yo like any man. He watched the wind chase a gull and the gull resent it and give in. "I stood in front of her," he said. "I stood closer than any man should to a person who has wronged him. And she looked at me and I saw all of what she is. I judged her then. I have not often judged. I am better at swinging. There is a difference. I do not know yet whether it will suit me." "You have time," Ned said. "No," Robert said. The gull had found a fish. "But I have more than I did yesterday." He pushed himself away from the stone like a man leaving a woman softer than he liked to leave a woman, with regret and relief both. "Let us go and find whether children can be made men with a strap and a word." They went down into the keep, which was as noisy and messy as it had been the day Robert first came into it with a sword at his hip and a song at his teeth. The sound of the sea came up the stairwell. The corridors were alive with the lives of small men and women who had no songs and no place in any ledger. Outside, the city moved and did not know that it had stepped from one story into another. In the holdfast, the rooms where Cersei had dressed were being turned into rooms where other women would fold linen. In the yard, Joffrey struck a pell with a ferocity that did not yet know itself. In a dark place under the keep, Varys listened to a boy cry and did nothing to stop it. Peter Baelish counted his steps and came to a place where he had once kissed someone and smiled because he remembered that she had not bitten him. In the kitchens, a pot boiled and a girl burned her hand and sucked the skin and forgot it 10 minutes later. At sea, a sail did something it had done all its life: take wind. Night fell and the moon rose and the king slept, and before sleep caught him he looked at the ceiling and saw not leaves this time but stars, little white falsities hammered into the wood, and he liked them. He dreamt of a boar that came to him in a field and laid down at his feet and let him put his hand on its head. In the morning there would be more men with letters and more meals he would not like and more arguments that required no hammer. He would find in those arguments a way to live. He would stand again and again and again. He would call a bastard a boy and a boy a man until the man earned it. He would order ships. He would hold his temper. He would fail many times and then he would do the thing right and no song would notice. He would not matter in the way he had once understood mattering. That was better. That was the thing no one ever told princes. That sometimes the glory is making bread younger men never learn to be grateful for. Somewhere in the Far East, a girl with silver hair woke and looked at a horizon and thought death had another name. And somewhere in the deep north a cold moved that had never learned how to warm its hands, and in Old Town texts were copied that had been copied more carefully 100 years ago. And the small folk counted coppers and children and tried to make both go farther than sense said they would. In King's Landing, in the Red Keep that was not red but old brick and stubbornness, Robert Baratheon rose from his bed with the sound of the sea in his ears and a look in his eye that made servants stand straighter. He took up the hammer he had brought to the solar and placed it not on the wall but in the corner, against the table where maps were spread. He wanted it close but not in his hand. He wanted to watch himself reach for words before he reached for iron. He felt the place where his side puckered. It twinged and then did not. He drew breath and tasted the air, and it tasted of dust and a scent he had not tasted in some time. Resolve. He went out and the day met him as days always do, with indifference, which is the true court of kings, and the only one that teaches them. He smiled at it, he lowered his head, and he went to work.